welcome to episode 1 of Unleashed This. Today we have CEO of Unleashed Technologies, Muhammad Hutasuhut, and we're going to be talking about the future growth of B2B e-commerce. So I'm glad you could join us. Thank you. Muhammad, would you tell us a little bit about why we're here and who you are?
Yeah, no, I'm so excited, to start off this Unleash This podcast, this series of podcasts that we're going to sort of share, the capabilities that we have across all our digital, offerings. My role here at Unleashed is the CEO of the company. And I know today we'll be focused on B2B e-commerce, which I'm really excited about. I know the title of this first podcast session is Where B2B Commerce is Heading. And really excited by all the work that we're doing here, but also just sharing with the audience here in public and yourself, what great work we're doing on the e-commerce side.
Great, thank you. I'm Ryan Grieb. For those that don't know, Vice President of Operations at Unleashed, and we'll be helping conduct this interview today with Muhammad. So as we get started, give us a little background, if you can, so we're talking e-commerce. We're talking B2B, we're talking digital clearly, but what does that mean? How are we really kind of culminating those three concepts into one thing here?
Yeah, I think, obviously the topic du jour is e-commerce, right? It's essentially the transaction of commerce, in an online setting effectively, right? I think most folks out there are very familiar with the B2C e-commerce, the sort of classic Amazon sort of, e-commerce transaction. And there are, very common attributes to that particular commercial transaction, right? We're focused today, obviously, on the B2B e-commerce side, which has similarities, but also has very distinct differences as well, right? From a traditional commercial transaction, online. And I think, part of it is sort of highlighting some of those key attributes, especially since there's a real perception out there, right, that B2B e-commerce is a little bit behind, right, than B2C. B2C has really accelerated in the past 10, 20 years. And I think it's now sort of shedding light on B2B and how I think that will be the part of e-commerce that'll move ahead.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit. So what do you mean? What are the big differentiators there between B2C and B2B? So clearly we're talking about consumer and business, but multiple questions already coming to mind, but give us the definitions if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So B2C obviously is you and me can go online and buy a product, right? Mm-hmm. Typically it's a consumer product as well, like a t-shirt or toothbrushes or whatever, electronic product like TVs, right? And usually those types of transactions online have certain features on that website, such as a cart, right? Where, it tallies up all the items you're buying and then it gives a dollar value and then you press purchase and then you essentially buy it, right? There's also features that when you first get to the website, there's a search functionality to it, right? You're looking for a t-shirt in a certain size and those attributes are put into the search engine and that produces, a list of items that you can choose from, right? And then once you actually choose that item, there's a product detail page, a PDP, right? That sort of highlights, right, what that product, entails. What are the dimensions? How many you want to buy, et cetera, right? So really gets into the detail, for a particular consumer for what I would call a fairly straightforward purchase. Now, when you're talking about B2B, the buyer is not a consumer in the traditional sense. It's not an individual like ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. It's an organization or a company. And so oftentimes you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, right? In that, representing that company,
sure,
right? And that buyer. So I think, what I would say is, there, even in those three attributes that are B2C in nature, right? On a website for a B2C transaction, for a B2B, there are also those attributes there too, but they're different, right? I mean, for instance, the PDP page, has industrial, could have industrial, has very sort of business-oriented items on there, right? And it provides some detail around dimensions as well, but perhaps in greater detail because it's more custom. Mm-hmm. There's also a cart aspect to it. That's another similarity. Of course, you need to actually tally up the items, aggregate the value, right, in dollars. And the search engine too, but the search engine is different as well here too. You can search by SKU, right? Which you can't necessarily do, right, on a B2C, commerce site. So there are shared attributes, but there's also differences even within those categories that we talk about.
Okay. So we're talking about search. We're talking about advanced faceted search, SKUs. My mind wants to wander to the place. Is it a different approach, really, when you're not dealing perhaps with the impulse buy of a consumer? We're all on Amazon. I see something I want. It's very easy to facilitate the transaction. In B2B, where if I get what you're saying, it's a more complex transaction, definitely different attributes available via the technology. How do we target those individual people? What are the strategies, or are there different strategies behind that?
Yeah, I think there are different strategies behind that, relative to B2C, right? I think in the B2B world, you're dealing with different stakeholders within the company. Who are the buyers, right? Oftentimes the consumers of the data online are not necessarily the actual buyers, the decision makers, right? In terms of being able to purchase that item or number of items. So thinking about the actual decision maker, thinking about the gateway buyer, who is that, right? I think that's critical. I think the other issue is, thinking about the user journey as well, of somebody who's on the website. Oftentimes with, business buyers or organizational buyers, they're repeat buyers. So you're thinking about more of a long-term relation. With an impulse buy, you might buy something on Amazon or on any site really, and effectively disappear for 6 months, right? But with business buyers, I think with the B2B space, there's got to be a recognition of that customer lifetime value, the relationship that you have. Oftentimes, a buyer of a website, of a B2B e-commerce site, is a distributor, is part of a network, an ecosystem. So I think there's almost an elevated sense that website has to reflect that relationship between, the manufacturer, let's say, the seller manufacturer, and the buyer distributor.
How do we reflect that? I mean, what does that look like? Is it different functionality? Is it different content? What's the play there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? I mean, one thing that distinguishes between B2C and B2B e-commerce is the thing called a configurator. So oftentimes, because of that relationship and because of the specific needs of that particular distributor buyer, let's say, a configurator is effectively a tool that enables a very tailored set of specifications to be inputted into to configure the product, basically, to tailor the product to that particular buyer, right? Oftentimes, like on B2C, you have a configurator. I mean, you basically choose red, blue, whatever. But I think in the context of a specific B2B e-commerce transaction, I mean, you have way more facets, way more attributes you can choose from to really tailor your product. I think the other thing is, oftentimes what I call, there's this new trend in B2B e-commerce called self-service portals. That is a reflection of how different B2B transactions are from B2C. Self-service portal, is essentially a kind of tailored account to that buyer that allows them to, because these purchases, by the way, are, they're not small in size. They're not $25 t-shirts. They could be in the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, right? So oftentimes you need that extra layer of, let's say, embedded in the self-service portal, not just like the ability to pay, the ability to change payment terms or, the ability to, adjust, your purchase, but it's also the case where you need a helpline, somebody that you can talk to on a very personal basis to adjust that customer order, if that self-service option isn't sufficient to your needs, right? But that portal allows you to have that sort of tailored personal sense of connection that reflects, I think, a special relationship between the distributor, let's say the buyer, and the manufacturer in that arrangement.
Got it. All right. So now I'm going a couple of different directions. Before I take this question over here, you mentioned trends. So what are we seeing in the marketplace today? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that, we're all familiar with B2C. They're definitely leading the charge, but are there things that are happening in the B2B world that are putting some of those very common marketplace trends at the forefront of that purchasing concept?
Yeah. I think like in some of the sort of functionality that I just spoke about, like search, for instance, right? I mean, it's true that even in B2C transactions, search is powerful, but in B2B, I would say it's equal or more so powerful. Like you have to have a very fast search engine. On top of that, you've got to have faceted search that really reflects the nature of the industry you're operating in as a B2B buyer, as a B2B e-commerce site operator, right? Industrial purchases are different from other types of purchases, right? Even within the B2B space. So that search engine has to be tailored to the facets, to the attributes that are unique to that search functionality, right? Things like natural language processing or natural language attributes to overcome typos. These things, the search engine has to embed. I would actually give it a great example. One of our clients, manufacturer, we built actually a fairly enhanced search engine for them to really go beyond just SKUs, to really understand in that industry, to really deep dive into the buyer, sort of persona, buyer activity, user journey, to see, okay, what search terms are they leveraging? Are they using SKUs, or are they using something else? They actually build pipes and valves. So are they using terms that are unique in that industry that are much more, applicable? And so really understanding the industry, I think helps. Whereas I think when B2C, it's more generic, right? Those search terms can be generic. So I think, understanding the industry that B2B buy or B2B operator or B2B participant is in helps to sort of frame, that kind of functionality even better.
So are there best practices perhaps, or dashboards, analytic components? Clearly we're serving content up to the people that need it, to distributors, to decision makers, to semi-decision makers. But let's rewind a little bit and talk about the organization. So how do you get some of these technical functional pieces that are happening on the website or with interactions amongst disparate systems? Where's the value add there? How are we essentially addressing digital transformation, if you will?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I think, with digital transformation, especially with B2B sectors that are, perhaps, were, let's just say, not as developed as in the B2C space, right? I think we have to be also sensitive to how folks are doing things from a business process standpoint. Like we have to respect that. And so there's a lot of training that goes involved that you have to engage in order to sort of adjust folks from, the old way of doing things to something more digital transformative, right? One example, for instance, is we're building an application, right, for a manufacturer of industrial air conditioning equipment. The company has actually moved incrementally in making sure that they respect their distributors, their distributor networks, and their network of folks who sell their equipment. And as it turns out, it's not just the sales. It's not just like agents who sell this stuff. It's a variety of things. It's the folks who sell their services. Could be quite different from the agents who sell the actual equipment, right? And so we built an application for them, essentially a kind of it's a geometrically designed sort of an application that allows a visitor to the website to, identify their rep, graphically. So using a map and then basically identifying, okay, if they're in the southeast of the US, okay, what's their quote unquote polygon or their geographic area, right? And then that sort of produces a list of all the representatives that relate to that region, including both products, services, you name it, the complete list. And that's been helpful because, I think some buyers are used to just wanting to call a person. They don't necessarily need, right, to have a complex e-commerce site. That is a form of an e-commerce transaction, effectively, just calling that person. So, I think there's also a level of respect, right? So that's part of digital transformation too. And I think the other part that's interesting is the same company, of course, also it has, they respect the sort of the traditional phone transactions, but they also recognize there are also a set of buyers out there, right, that want to get their information online. They don't really want to have a phone call. And so we're also working with this company on building an application that, enables a much quicker turnaround. So they submit, let's say, a set of specs, and then the site will produce a CAD design, and allows the buyer to sort of see, okay, well, this is the kind of this is the kind of product I can get, specs I submit, right? Effectively a configurator as well.
Sure.
Well, it turns out, for a variety of reasons, the server that they have in their HQ is slow, and we know that according to industry best practices, anything that lasts more than a few seconds, producing a CAD design, in this case it was like literally 45 seconds. It's too slow. It effectively, a visitor to that and someone who's submitting those specs leaves the website immediately. So for that kind of matter, you need to have a rapid response. And so we're building a Symfony-based application. Symfony is a PHP language that we leverage here at Unleashed, to reduce the processing time of creating that CAD design, right, from 45 seconds to less than like 1, right? The point there is this same company understands, yes, we've got certain buyers that we have to respond in this way, traditional methods, but we also have to have faster technological ways to respond to other buyers who are perhaps more technologically savvy.
Yeah. So it seems that you're coming at the same point, focal point here from two different directions. We have a consumer base that is most likely more digitized, wants to do online transactions, has been entering the workforce and is raised on that sort of all digital, kind of spectrum. And then we also have, the sales side, which may or may not be used to that kind of digital context. Yeah. So let's talk about both for a second. Perhaps first the sales side, and diving back into the term digital transformation. What do we say, and how do we help those organizations that are, expecting a workforce perhaps to transition from a more standard or traditional approach to sales to really kind of adopting what's happening digitally? That can be a hard sell. And then we'll get into the actual expectation side later. But if you could shed some light on, how we might be addressing kind of the need to come to the table, if so to speak, with digital.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting, right? I think you're right. I think the B2B sector, e-commerce sector, is at a crossroads, right? You have, of course, traditional folks who are not sort of versed in, digital methodology, right? That perhaps, they might know a little bit about the e-commerce side from the B2C exposure, but beyond that, they're sort of limited. There's another set, younger crowd, of course, who are very digitally savvy, have been brought up in really probably B2C as their primary, purchasing behavior. And
that trend's not stopping. I mean, at all.
So it's interesting. Like we're sort of passing ships in the night, right? And so I think a lot of this is what makes B2B companies is somewhat challenged here, right? Because they're trying to go through this transition and trying to appease both constituencies, right, during this process of transition. And you're right. Increasingly, it's going to be much more digitally focused. I think in the past, trying to appease both has been very challenging, right? And I think that previous technologies, I think, probably had a hard time in dealing with that. Now, I think, with the advent of things like headless technology, with API-driven technology, it makes it easier, I think, for us to be able to engage in digital transformation and to go after those crowds, with different strategies as well.
Right.
And when I say headless, I'm really referring to, oftentimes you'd have one code base, for instance, right, covering the front end, the look and feel, and the back end, which is sort of the guts, the data. Interestingly, now, you can have headless applications. You can actually have, a dominant code base for the front end, which is known for, really producing wonderful front end, and a different code base, undergirding the back end, right? That's what headless is, essentially, effectively enabling the very best of both worlds to come together and produce something really cool.
So what's the benefit there? I mean, from an end user perspective, from a distributor perspective, from a sales organization perspective.
Yeah, no, I think, I think the great benefit of something like that from an end user standpoint is that you will get faster experiences with incredible visual, experience as well, right? It's you're getting in the, as an example, for instance, we built an e-commerce site for our largest customer, sporting goods distributor, in the React front end, which Facebook revolutionized, and helped to build the Facebook site. And then we used in the back end Symfony code base, which is a PHP based code base that we're very familiar with because we are a PHP focused digital agency. So in that situation, we realized that if we'd done a Symfony front end and a Symfony back end, it could still work, the website could still work, but it wouldn't have the same visual stunning experiences. There's also quite a few rendered 3D images in that site. We wouldn't have that sort of rich visual experience, right? So for the end user, like, if it was a monolithic code base, the same code base, it wouldn't be as visually pleasing, aesthetically pleasing, right? So I think there's that element. But with the Symfony code base, you also retain the speed as well. So you get the best of both worlds, really. Okay. The other interesting thing is oftentimes with a headless application, now this is not for the end user, but for the company that operates the site itself, oftentimes you get more flexibility as well. You're not wedded to some sort of monolithic code base or application, that has very specific rules. Because you've created something more flexible that gets, that has two code bases, you get basically, a lot more, you're able to maneuver, you're able to make changes more quickly. You're not wedded to a specific single platform. You can actually, you're in control, essentially. Yep, you're nimble, you're agile, right? And so I think that's another aspect, I think, of being a B2B operator that you get from sort of headless applications. I think the rise of APIs as well, right? Where you can connect essentially, different applications together that oftentimes in the past couldn't speak to each other at all, and created significant, problems there, right? One arm of the company couldn't talk to the other arm, the B2B company. So I think now with the rise of APIs, a lot of B2B companies are able to take full advantage of legacy assets to create new functionality. You don't have to buy, the multi-million-dollar platform every year, right? Or every few years. Okay. You can take advantage of those legacy assets, use Symfony code base, for instance, to connect those APIs and produce new functionality. Really take full advantage of your legacy digital assets to its fullest value.
And I assume Unleashed is helping on that front, building out those reporting dashboards, tying systems together, et cetera.
Absolutely. So, what makes Unleashed really powerful is that we are, preferred agency for Symfony in North America. The creator of Symfony, Sensio Labs, based in Paris. We have a very tight, close relationship with them. Our experience is also quite varied. We can build that custom platform, right? That what was talking about earlier, the React front end, Symfony, good headless application. That was a multi-million-dollar application, candidly. But we can also build microservice applications, right? Like if a company has a specific business pain point they want to address, just like for instance, a good example was the example I gave earlier regarding this CAD design, right? An app that facilitates faster processing of that CAD design, responsiveness of that CAD design back to the visitor, to the requester on the website. That is an application, a Symfony-based application. That it focuses on a business pain point, a microservice application, right? So we can do the full spectrum of work. We can do the custom-based applications that offer really comprehensive e-commerce experiences. But on the other end of that spectrum, we can also provide microservice applications that address specific business pain points for companies.
All right. So full service applications, microservice applications. We're talking about the needs of the organization, the needs of distributors, the needs of consumers. Talk to me a little bit about how technology and how this type of B2B transaction can actually be good for some people that are outside of that spectrum. Yeah. Underserviced communities, people in need, et cetera. What are we doing that addresses that component?
Yeah, no, I think, there's been a lot of talk, I think, out there about supply chain problems, right? And I think it goes to the heart of a lot of really sensitive issues that we've had over the past 40, 50 years, even related to globalization. A lot of communities in America, working class communities,
Sure.
have really suffered, right, with offshoring, going to places like China, right, for manufacturing. I think there's been a real come to Jesus moment, candidly, right, in America around the desire to bring back folks into the factory floor. And what does that mean? That means that we have to bring those factories back to America, right? Mm-hmm. What we call inshoring as opposed to offshoring, right? And I think, digital helps to resuscitate a lot of hard-hit communities.
How so? So specifically?
Yeah, specifically, I think it allows, as supply chains come back, right, to the U.S., as factories come back to the U.S., right, digital makes it possible. It reduces the cost, right, of being able to, effectively stay competitive. Because I think part of the reason why a lot of those factories went abroad, obviously, was because they had cheaper labor, right? Our labor pricing in America hasn't changed that much, right? And so technology then lowers the overall cost of facilitating and creating that product in America, right? And I think digital transformation, leveraging the web and website applications, for instance, as an example, for our largest client, we've built an e-commerce application that directly ties into the factory floor, right? So that order essentially gets executed, gets configured with a configurator, gets completed, and then goes to the factory floor. They make jerseys, custom jerseys for schools, and essentially there's a direct link, and it's APIs, right, from the e-commerce shop tied into the factory floor that enables, right, kind of a line of sight connection, right? Technology and digital makes that happen. Our software, our Symphony code-based software makes that happen, right? So I think that's what makes it possible, for made in the USA products to come back and to help, underserved and hard-hit communities, that have been traditionally hit hard, right, by the offshoring phenomenon.
So some digital efficiency there. Makes me think again. So we have, largest client, jersey manufacturer, some very custom Symphony work that's been taking orders that are coming in and feeding them directly to the factory floors. Clearly, there's an acceleration there of kind of the time to market. But in your estimation, what does that mean? Is custom better? Is off the shelf better? What are we talking about here?
I think it depends. I think, there's what I would say to that is, if you're late, it depends on your ideal customer profile. Like, I think we've dealt with companies and clients before that have been very focused on, let's say, their existing clients, really drive revenue from existing clients, right? In that context, you may not need an absolute custom platform. Maybe you just need an off-the-shelf platform, right? Because your goals are less ambitious. You're not, we know that the cost of sales going after new customers can be, exponentially more expensive than going after existing customers, right? And so in that context, if your ideal customer profile is existing clients, maybe all you need is something off the shelf, tweak it, and then you target your guys because you already have some information about your client roster, right? For something more radical, more ambitious, you may need, let's say going after new clients in a new market, maybe even new geography, you may need, an e-commerce platform that is much more aggressive, much more ambitious, and requires a little bit more investment dollars, right, to target that type of customer. And what I would say is, because the e-commerce experience can vary. I mean, there's the pre-purchase, there's sort of the awareness category, right? As it relates to SEO, how a B2B business is targeting, those buyers out there, the online quoting tool, the configurators I talked about. There's a lot of time and money that you can spend, especially that's with a configurator, let's say, that's tailored to a specific industry, right? And then you're talking about the digital product catalog. The next phase after that, is the ordering process. What does that look like, right? The kind of personalization tools. There's, a lot of pricing model, like how do you, monitor dynamic pricing, right, to make sure that you're running, a profit, right, with every transaction you're generating. Digital contracts. Then there's post-purchase. There's the order tracking, right? Tracking that order. I mean, we've seen that on a lot of B2C e-commerce sites. And then, of course, post-purchase, what I'd call before the self-service portals, right? These things that, enable a close connection, with your buyer network, with your distributor network, right? So, all of these factors, right? Awareness, ordering, post-ordering, order tracking, post-purchase, that they can vary based on simply your ideal customer target, right? And that will then dictate, I think, how complex that e-commerce platform is. Does it require a little bit more custom, or does it not? Right? Is it a little something more off the shelf? So it really depends on what kind of customer you're targeting.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about platforms, if you don't mind. So clearly you have a website. Clearly there are other systems within the organization that have a lot of value and input into this type of concept. We've talked about Headless, we've talked about Symphony, we've talked about some custom applications. What other e-commerce technologies are available, have that sort of perhaps more, not quite off the shelf, but not quite 100% custom application? Is there something in the middle? I'm thinking Shopify, I'm thinking all of these other things that we've dealt with online. So happy to get your input there.
Yeah. I would say, happy to talk about Shopify Plus, sort of the B2B kind of version of Shopify. Shopify is more traditional B2C. There's also BigCommerce as well. That's another name that's well known. Now, with those types of players, we'll go after that. Those are the kind of software platforms that we don't generally deal with. A lot of the businesses that use Shopify Plus and BigCommerce are smaller businesses, and they tend to, you pay one fee essentially. They do everything for you: the hosting, the maintenance, all of that, right?
So let me read back to my question. We have Shopify, and we have completely custom, huge manufacturer in the middle. What are we dealing with there?
Yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to add that with Shopify BigCommerce, oftentimes you pay a transaction fee for every transaction you generate. So it can get quite expensive, right? Particularly for a mid-sized business, larger business. That's why those types of businesses generally shy away from Shopify Plus and BigCommerce. So to your question about mid-size and even larger companies, right? There's a couple of technologies out there, and I'll start with the ones that we deal with, right? There's Magento. Magento was acquired by Adobe Commerce. They're sort of the standard open source e-commerce platform, out there, very, very popular, very widely known. And companies like Magento, because of the name, it's been there for a while, for well over a decade, and it's very popular. That's one, what I would call off the shelf platform. It does require tweaking, because, different industries demand different things, the look and feel of a cart, let's say, maybe a configurator as well. But, if you want something that's well established and has a reputation, Magento is one of them, very appealing to midsize and larger businesses. There's another company out of Germany called Shopware, also PHP-based, platform, more tuned, whereas Magento is sort of generic B2C, B2B. It can be tailored to B2B. Shopware is really probably more targeted at the B2B space, frankly. And so that's growing in the US market as well, but primarily European in nature. That's sort of on the what I call off-the-shelf side of things, right? As you move towards more custom, that also ranges as well, right? So we deal with Symphony, and the Symphony product line generally is actually on the far side of that. It's very, what I would say, custom. Now, there are some what I call Symphony-based code bases that are a little bit less custom. There's a little bit more structure to it. So there's two in particular that we operate, with. It's called Silius. That's one, kind of platform that is not as custom as Symphony, but, has some embedded features in there that are common, what I would say, to B2B e-commerce. There's another very popular language in the US called Laravel, actually. Laravel, can be used for e-commerce as well. It can be used for microservice applications as well. And again, if you're looking for something a little bit more custom, less off the shelf, that's also another option, out there that we can also support clients with.
Sure. Thank you. So, it is interesting. Episode 1, right? Trying to facilitate this conversation as naturally as possible. And, It's per our introductions, we work very closely together.
Yeah.
But it's interesting just talking to you as much as we talk every day, how much I've learned just in the last 10 minutes of hearing you answer these questions that, we bat around all the time. So thank you very much. Any other thoughts? We've talked about everything from, the small or B2B e-commerce solution in Shopify to, kind of that mid-market Magento 2, which can definitely scale up. It's backed by Adobe, so it can go as far as necessary.
Yeah.
And then the very custom sort of microservice to full-blown application, headless, if you will, backed by Symfony. Any other closing thoughts there?
Yeah, I would just a few closing thoughts. I would say that, what can't be underestimated, we are a development agency, right? But hardware, the software is important, but the hardware is equally important too. I mean, we have a partnership with Platform SH, which is a well-established platform as a service provider, cloud hosting provider, basically. So choosing the right host also is critical, right? Because if you're keen on speed, and making sure that experience is not only fast, but also reliable, like that your website actually, holds up to scrutiny and doesn't, experience, outages, that kind of thing. Because, with an e-commerce site, time is money, literally, right? The more you're off that site, the less money you're going to make, right? It's critical. So understanding, development agency partner that has a real strong relationship with a host, I think is really important, a cloud host. And in particular, we have a platinum partnership, with Platform SH, which helps us a lot. The other thing that's interesting, I would say, is the rise of artificial intelligence, generative AI. This is the topic du jour, right now, in the past 4 to 6 months, is, how to really take advantage. What will for a lot of agencies and just people in general, what will the website experience look like with AI, right? Yes, we can see some chatbots that will happen, but it might be the case, as I mentioned earlier, in a self-service portal, you still need to have the human element, right? It's not enough, especially to maintain these relationships with these buyers in this sort of ecosystem, these networks, right? Distributor networks. It's fine to have a chatbot, but you still need to have some redundancy, some contingency to be able to talk to somebody in a human-like, human person potentially. So, and the big question,
content on the fly, right? To, address queries that might not be typical, or that might be trying to span multiple product lines, or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I know generative AI is trying to be that, is trying to solve for that. I'm sure as we've done in the past, like, when we're working on different searches, right? We're trying to guess. Oftentimes part of faceted search is also trying to figure out, okay, what are the most popular search terms?
Sure.
And then them as kind of visible to the visitors as possible. I think the same thing goes for generative AI. What are those use cases, that visitors to a B2B site, what kind of questions are they going to have? And so knowing that then enables, I think, that generative AI to use that's the language learning, that's the LLM data, right? That's the language learning model data that then feeds into an effective generative AI. So what does that look like on a B2B e-commerce site, right? I think that's going to be a big question mark, moving forward.
Yeah, and hopefully a topic of upcoming podcasts.
Oh, definitely. I think it will be. I think the other thing that I would add also is, because e-commerce has been traditionally characterized by the B2C experience, B2B for years, I would even say for decades, has been sort of a red stepchild.
Yeah.
But I think that's changing now because of these trends that are happening, globally, like, inshoring and the digital transformation in industry. I think that digitization of industry is going to really accelerate B2B e-commerce sites. It's going to really force a lot of people to really think about, moving away from fax machines, right? And phone calls, really driving the website as the key driver, not just the secondary driver, tertiary driver, but the primary driver.
Sure.
And that's what makes this so exciting, because I think we're entering into this decade with the recognition that this is a true opportunity for so many of our clients.
Yeah.
Operate these B2B space.
And kind of full circle, we started the conversation with, isn't everyone a consumer, right? Regardless of whether you're a business or the traditional B2C, we're all buying. And yes, the content seems to change, the strategies change. You might not be the end stakeholder. There might be a much longer tail, much more, highly bifurcated approach to traditional B2B, but it's all coming digital. And that's the really unique and exciting thing.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And it just goes to show, right? If factory workers are going to be, our America's, working class communities, if they're going to be the ones operating the robots at the factories, but it just makes sense, right? That the whole buying experience for B2B buyers, for buyers in the B2B network, right? Like the distributors who are, buying from a manufacturer, they're also going to be digitized, right?
Right.
They're also going to be leveraging like websites and web applications to facilitate those transactions.
Yeah.
So I think it's a 360 thing, the whole thing is going to be transformed. And I think that's what makes this so exciting.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. Closing thoughts are yours. Podcast number one.
Yeah, I think I'm so excited about starting this Unleash This podcast. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about, just to kind of preview some things. We're going to be talking obviously on this e-commerce trends on the B2B side. We're also going to be talking about, healthcare, which is your expertise, right? On digital strategy and website development. So there's more to come. ChatGPT, AI, generative AI, a lot of issues, I think, in the podcast to come that I'm so excited as part of this Unleash This series. So really, I'm thankful, obviously, for you joining this call and having this session together for this, Where B2B E-commerce is Heading podcast today. As always, I think this is for you and for, of course, the public. If you have more questions or want to dig deeper on any of the topics we covered today, I think folks out there can connect us, at www.unleashed-technologies.com. Obviously we'd like to keep the conversation going and help you make the best technology choices for your business, for your organization. But until that next time, let's keep unleashing the potential and, with new sites, new web apps, with Unleashed and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you, Muhammad.